The year is 1518, a time of immense change and uncertainty across Europe. The echoes of the Renaissance were growing louder, but old superstitions and fears still held sway over the lives of many. And in Strasbourg, a bustling city nestled along the Rhine, life was about to take a turn toward the truly bizarre, as it prepared to witness one of history's strangest and most unsettling events. The usual sounds of commerce, the bartering and haggling, and the carefree laughter of children playing in the streets would soon be replaced by something far more disturbing. A cacophony of frantic footsteps and desperate cries, a relentless, inexplicable rhythm that would grip the city in its throes. It began with a single, peculiar incident, a lone woman overcome by an unseen force that quickly escalated into a terrifying spectacle, drawing more and more people into its chaotic orbit. This was no ordinary sickness, no fever or pox. It didn't confine people to their beds, leaving them to suffer in silence, but drove them into an exhausting, uncontrollable motion, a dance of desperation and despair. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, baking the city in its sweltering heat as a different kind of fever, a fever of the mind and body, gripped the city. Authorities, clergy and physicians were baffled, scratching their heads in confusion, powerless against this mysterious compulsion, this invisible force that held their citizens in its sway. Strasbourg's citizens became unwilling marionettes, their limbs jerking and flailing, their bodies no longer their own, their minds lost in a fog of exhaustion and delirium. The city was about to be swept up in a dance, a macabre waltz with death, that would lead some to their deaths, collapsing from exhaustion, their hearts giving out under the strain. What could possess ordinary people, driving them to such extremes, to dance themselves into oblivion? What dark force was at play? Let's step into this bizarre summer, into the heart of 16th century Strasbourg, and uncover the mystery behind the dancing plague. Imagine, if you will, the narrow, winding cobblestone streets of Strasbourg in the year 1518. A time of superstition, faith, and the ever-present threat of disease. It all began with Frau Troffia, a woman seemingly ordinary, about to become the catalyst for an extraordinary and unsettling event. In the sweltering heat of mid-July, she stepped into the street, perhaps intending to run a simple errand, or simply to escape the confines of her home for a brief moment. Little did she know her life and the lives of countless others were about to change forever. And then she started to dance, not a joyful dance, not a celebratory dance, but something altogether different. There was no music to guide her steps, no joy in her face, or just a strange, unsettling, compulsive movement that seemed to grip her entire being. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, as if controlled by some unseen force. Neighbors, initially curious, watched in growing confusion and unease. What started as a strange spectacle quickly morphed into something deeply disturbing. As the hours bled into days, she danced on, seemingly without rest, driven by an invisible and relentless energy. Her body, pushed beyond its limits, teetered on the brink of collapse, yet she was unable to stop. Her husband and other concerned members of the community, witnessing her torment, tried desperately to intervene, to pull her from this bizarre trance. But she was beyond their reach, locked in a world of her own, a world of ceaseless, frantic movement. The basic necessities of life, sleep, food, and water were completely forgotten, cast aside in the face of this overwhelming compulsion. It was as if her body was no longer her own, but a vessel driven by an unseen, malevolent force. And then something even stranger began to occur. Others, drawn in by the spectacle, or perhaps succumbing to the same mysterious influence, joined her. At first, it was just a few isolated individuals, mirroring Frau Troffia's frantic movements. Then, the numbers swelled to dozens, the cobblestone streets echoing with the sound of shuffling feet. Each new dancer was caught in the same relentless, exhausting dance, their faces etched with a mixture of pain and a strange, unsettling ecstasy. The strange affliction spread like wildfire through the city, an invisible contagion of movement. Onlookers, initially hesitant, found themselves irresistibly drawn into the dance, their curiosity giving way to an uncontrollable urge to move. As the days of July continued to pass, marked on calendars with increasing dread, the number of dancers had swelled dramatically, transforming the city's squares into a swirling mass of exhausted, ecstatic bodies. The city was no longer just witnessing a strange and isolated event, a bizarre anomaly on the fringes of everyday life. It was now completely and utterly in the grip of a dancing epidemic, a phenomenon that defied explanation and threatened to consume everything in its path. The authorities, initially dismissive, soon realized that this was no mere outbreak of isolated madness, no fleeting moment of collective hysteria. This was a full-blown crisis, a societal breakdown that threatened to completely overtake Strasbourg and plunge it into chaos. The origins of this bizarre outbreak were as mysterious and unfathomable as the nature of the compulsion itself, leaving the city gripped by fear and uncertainty. And at the heart of it all, at the very epicenter of this bewildering phenomenon, stood Frau Trophäa, the unlikely catalyst of a movement that no one could explain, control, or understand. As July gracefully transitioned into August, the warmth of summer blanketed the city. But beneath the veneer of seasonal tranquility, a strange and unsettling phenomenon was about to unfold. Hundreds were suddenly, inexplicably caught in the throes of what would become known as the dancing mania. A bizarre compulsion seized them, an invisible force compelling them to move. Streets once bustling with commerce and daily life became chaotic dance floors, echoing with the frantic steps of those afflicted. The normal rhythms of the city were disrupted, replaced by an unsettling spectacle. The air was filled with the sound of shuffling feet on cobblestones, punctuated by cries of pain and exhaustion as the dancers struggled against their own bodies. The dancers were not willing participants in this strange and unsettling performance. Their faces reflected a mixture of confusion, fear, and utter helplessness. They were compelled by something unseen, their bodies betraying them, forcing them into a relentless, exhausting dance. It was as if an external force had taken control. Days of ceaseless movement without rest or respite inevitably led to utter exhaustion. The relentless dancing took its toll. Dehydration became rampant, further weakening the afflicted and adding to their suffering. And tragically, the relentless dancing combined with exhaustion and dehydration led to death for some. Families watched helplessly as their loved ones succumbed to this bizarre and terrifying affliction. They could only stand by in anguish as loved ones danced themselves to collapse, their bodies unable to endure any longer. Fear and confusion gripped the city, spreading like wildfire through the panicked populace. No one understood what was happening. This was clearly no ordinary disease, no ailment that could be treated with the usual remedies. Was it divine punishment? A sign of God's wrath visited upon the city for its sins? Or was it the work of witchcraft, a dark and malevolent force unleashed upon the unsuspecting inhabitants? Or could it be something else entirely, a phenomenon beyond their comprehension, something rooted in the unknown? Daily life was paralyzed, grinding to a halt as the dancing plague consumed the city's attention and resources. And the city's spirit, its sense of community and hope, was broken by the relentless spectacle of suffering and despair. The dancing plague was not just an individual tragedy, a personal crisis for those afflicted and their families. It was a citywide crisis that consumed Strasbourg, threatening to tear apart the very fabric of society. The nightmare seemed endless, a perpetual state of suffering with no clear end in sight. With no cure in sight, desperation grew, and the people of Strasbourg were left to grapple with a mystery that defied explanation. Desperate for answers, Strasbourg's people and leaders searched for explanations. Some blamed ergot poisoning, a fungus in rye bread causing convulsions and hallucinations. Others saw mass hysteria triggered by stress, fear, and the power of suggestion. Religious theories abounded. Was it divine wrath, demonic possession, or a plea to St. Vitus? Each theory offered a lens, but none fully explained the endurance or deaths. Perhaps it was a mix of food poisoning, psychological distress, and spiritual panic. The truth remains elusive, buried beneath centuries of speculation. The dancing plague defied easy answers, leaving only questions in its wake. The city's leaders, desperate to end the crisis, tried everything. Physicians and priests failed. Prayers and processions brought no relief. In a bizarre move, authorities built a stage and hired musicians, hoping the dancers could sweat it out. Open spaces and guild halls were set aside for the afflicted, turning the city into a public dance hall. The intention was to cure, but the result was chaos, more music, more dancing, more suffering. The spectacle grew, drawing in even more participants. Instead of abating, the plague intensified and the death toll rose. The city's well-meaning efforts only fueled the mania. Strasbourg became a theatre of relentless, officially sanctioned suffering. It was clear dancing it out was not the solution. Then, as suddenly as it began, the dancing plague faded. By early September, the dances slowed, the music stopped, and silence returned. Survivors, exhausted and traumatized, tried to resume their lives. Authorities banned public dancing and dismantled the stages. Some afflicted were taken to shrines for religious rituals, hoping for spiritual healing. The city was left scarred, haunted by the memory of that bizarre summer. The dancing plague remains a mystery. Was it poison, panic, or something deeper? Centuries later, we're still left wondering what truly made Strasbourg dance itself to the brink.